Welcome to Just Three Workplace Gurus, a podcast about the real world of work. I am Vivian.
I'm Amy.
And I'm Mike.
Today we have a very special guest with us, Alan Hedge. Thank you so much for joining us. Alan Hedge. Yeah. So Alan Hedge is a professor emeritus at Cornell University. Has spent a really amazing career in the world of ergonomics, wellness, product design, research, you name it. I think you've done it. I'll turn it over to you, Alan, if you want to just say a few more words about yourself, and then we can dig into our topic today. So, Alan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Vivian. So I have been involved in the field of ergonomics, which of course was founded in the UK after World War II. I happen to have actually once taken a class from the person who coined the word ergonomics.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Hugh Morrell, who was a Welsh professor. And for the longest time, of course, we Brits, or ex-Brits, because I'm American, claim ergonomics. But in actual fact, it was really first written about in Poland back in the 1860s. So let's acknowledge the Poles started ergonomics, the Brits resurrected it after World War II, and then from the mid-70s onwards, ergonomics started to become much more fashionable because this was the era of a technology change, the introduction of computers into a variety of different workplaces. And for probably 10 years, computers were seen as the savior of work. And then all of a sudden, some things began to happen. And they first manifested themselves formally in Australia in the form of what became known as RSI, repetitive strain injuries. And so from the early to mid-80s, people began to say, wait a minute, maybe computer use is not such a benign activity.
Absolutely.
Maybe there are a whole variety of things we need to rethink. I mean, there'd been some very early work, if you think of it in terms of some ergonomic characteristics. So if you were a typist, you had a typing chair that would allow you to rotate and was height adjustable, and you had a typewriter return that would lower a keyboard to a more comfortable level for you to work with. When computers came along, all of that went out the window, right? And that was, oh no, that's old style technology. So from the late 70s, early 80s onwards, suddenly there was a lot of research being done to figure out what is going on. Some of that early work focused on, well, it's the design of the keyboard. And then people began to come up with alternative designs, things like the split keyboards. What those people didn't know is that the first split keyboard was actually developed by Lucian Crandall in the 1870s in upstate New York, because back then he knew that typing on a regular keyboard was a problem because of the... So if you look at the angle of split there, it was identical to the one that Microsoft used when they had a split keyboard. So, history repeats itself. But keyboards became the first thing. And back then, everything was still sort of cursor controlled. But along came the computer mouse. A good while after its introduction, because it was linked with the ability to now use graphics on a computer screen. And that came out of Xerox PARC work in California. And then suddenly it went from, oh boy, we have injuries related to keyboarding. Now we have injuries related to mousing as well. It put different stressors on the body, putting your hand and arm in different positions. And from then on, things kind of took off. Back then, screens were pretty glossy glass screens. There was a lot of glare, so you had an eye strain and you had neck So I like to think that the mid to late 80s and the 90s were the heyday of computer ergonomics, right? Yoo-hoo! And that's because people were getting injured and nobody knew how to deal with that, and it was a burden on companies. And that was the heyday of the development of ergonomic standards, right up to, the International Standards Organization today has 66 ergonomic standards. The USA has 0, because they don't recognize the International Standards Organization.
Very interesting. Except for California, who was forward thinking, as the only
Well,
state that has
the
one
states,
ergonomic
yes,
standard.
some states have things, and some had good ones. Washington State did, and then that has sort of vanished. Michigan did, that has sort of, so, things come and go. But the international standards cover a whole variety of different issues with ergonomics, the cognitive issues of screen design and layout, and, the physical issues of technology design, the environmental issues, etc. And again, you will remember that we got to the point of there being a very short-lived ergonomics regulation that actually, I believe, lasted less than 2 months before a different administration sort of put an end to any kind of regulation. Since that time, ergonomics has not been at the forefront of many people's thinking. In the early days, it was because of injury and then the cost of those injuries, and workers' compensation costs were a major driver. That began to change by the 2010s, I would say, it was beginning to change. Some states, California always has been at the forefront of this, and other states, like we did a lot of work with the state of New Jersey, believe it or not. They were very active. They all wanted to reduce health costs. They all wanted to improve, employee comfort and productivity. They all wanted to retain their workforce because you've trained somebody who's highly skilled. But then that began to change in the 2000s because other things happened. People began to see, wait a minute, we can send a lot of this work overseas. I was doing work with digital radiologists, which is a very computer-intensive activity, and then a lot of hospitals realized that, wait a minute, instead of paying people to work overnight, we'll just send it off to China or India, and in the morning we'll have the right? So,
and today it's going to be AI.
well, today AI can play a role here, and we can talk about that. But what happened was, if you like, there was suddenly a globalization of ergonomics, and problems began to emerge in other parts of the world. So SEANS, which is a Southeast Asia area, suddenly, I was traveling over there to talk about ergonomic issues because they were now experiencing the problems that we had experienced in the US, that the Australians, the whole thing was a loop. But now we're in a state of economic thinking that is saying, okay, let's bring everything back to the USA. So we'll see whether that increases interest in ergonomics. In the meantime, because of the media attention on major issues like climate change, whether you think it's real or not, that refocused a lot of people to start thinking about sustainability issues. And suddenly you found companies were no longer talking about their products as being ergonomically designed, but about the products being made from sustainable materials. And that's great, and absolutely, but the two are not mutually mutually exclusive. We want products, you can have, you can sit on a tree trunk and you have a wonderfully environmentally responsible product and an awful thing to sit on, and you're going to get injured. So,
splinters.
so what I began talking about in the, I guess, just before COVID, was talking about human sustainability. You can't have an office building that's full of sustainable products that injure or impede the ability of your people to work in a healthy and productive way. Right?
Amen.
Amen. Yes.
Amen. Yes, go ahead.
And then a wonderful little virus made its way over here, and we actually. I, along with some researchers here, did quite a bit of work on that, looking at how the virus would actually move through different airstreams and things like that. But that's by the by.
That's for another podcast episode.
the effect that that had was an almost instantaneous effect, saying, let's forget about large commercial workspaces and let everybody work at home.
Yeah.
And let's either go for all home working, or what we're now to is some form of hybrid working. And of course, in reality, if you had a little apartment in, say, Manhattan, there was no way you could set that up really to work super effectively in terms of good ergonomics. So a lot of issues re-emerged during the 4 to 5 COVID years that now are beginning to show themselves again. But there were some pluses. You know, the average person saved up to 2 hours a day in commuting, which they didn't like, right? They had their own control over their work pace and work activities. And yes, there were, fortunately, technologies like this technology were around. Otherwise, COVID would have been absolutely catastrophic. But that is still something, hybrid working is still something that's sort of a legacy emerging and changing phenomenon. In some parts of the world, for example, in the UK, the government said, well, if you work at home for more than 2 days a week and you get injured, then the company is responsible.
Yes.
So what has that led to? Well, a company's saying you can't work more than 2 days a week at home. Nothing has changed. Right? But people went back into the workplace, and somewhere in all of that, ergonomics seems to have been lost. The whole notion of how do we refocus people on what ergonomics is trying to do, which is trying to create a healthful, productive environment for people to do work, to be satisfied and not get injured. And it's in the company's interest to want to promote ergonomics. So
it's almost as if the companies have assumed that going back to the office is how you will get your ergonomics squared away, which also is not true.
Well, yes, and if I mean, the companies that I have talked to, not a one has said we want people to go back to the office to improve the ergonomics of how they're working. What they've almost all said is we want people to go back to the office so we can see what they're doing.
Right.
I agree with that, Alan.
And their focus has been on social workspaces. You know, meeting rooms, and they're saying, oh, you can, now that you have portable technology, you can work anywhere in the building.
Yes.
And so ergonomics, you may have an ergonomic workstation, but if you're not sitting at it using it, you know, if you're sitting in a coffee bar or a cafeteria, it doesn't work.
Yes, and I'd like to also add that couple of things. One is I want to go back a second and
Sure.
what you're saying. But our experience as a company that's been around for 25 plus years, we've done tens of thousands of evals all over the world. You know, it did very much start in the workers' comp realm. In California, where we got our start, that regulation hung over people's heads, and the ergonomics regulation, and it was feared. Let's just put it that way. Over time, we saw it leave the workers' comp and go into more of a proactive sort of benefits or even attraction to our company. Hey, why can I work here when Google, they have sit-stand desks and I want blah, blah, blah. So it started becoming a competitive thing. And then we saw ergonomics grow, and on-site ergonomics was something leadership had budget for, had awareness of, and were comfortable with. And then COVID hits, everybody goes home. Not only were they in tiny apartments in New York, they were, and I kid you not, Alan, they were in bathtubs, they were in closets, in hammocks, in cars, in hallways. I have 7 roommates. I have to do my meetings literally in the hall, sitting on the floor with my feet extended in front. You name it, it happened. And then ergonomics sort of did this weird fade. And we're like, because they were out of sight, out of mind. And then it became a little bit, I think what you were trying to say, Mike, that you don't feel good at home, come back to the office.
Right.
Here we have adjustable things, but they're like, but I live in Kansas and the office is in San Francisco and you hired me here, you know. And they took a lot of companies have taken away assigned seating. So we have this hoteling in the mix. So not only are they coming back to no dedicated workplace, this sort of floating work model, 2 workstations at a minimum, home and work. Now there's AI in the mix, which is impacting and infiltrating in unique ways. So I think this might be a really good segue into what's happening in the workplace. How is AI kind of sort of showing itself? And why don't we start with the positives, right? Because there's a lot of great things for efficiency, blah, blah, blah. So, Alan, when I heard you last year give a wonderful presentation at the Ergo Expo conference in Las Vegas, you had a lot to say about that. So maybe we could start on like three positives and we can kind of weigh in, and then we can maybe pivot to the wellness side of things. And then I know, Mike, you wanted to talk about the fear of AI too.
I did.
Well, I have a job tomorrow. Yes. So anyway, Alan, what would you say? Like, what are you seeing out there? What is your take on that?
Okay. Just so you know, the first AI project I worked on was in the early 1980s. So AI, back then, life was very different, computing-wise. So AI is not really a new tool in the world of cognitive ergonomics. Right? I personally think it's a misnomer. I think it shouldn't be artificial intelligence, it should be assistive intelligence, because human intelligence is not unidimensional. Right? Intelligence is multidimensional. Some people are really great at music, or really great at math or language or whatever. Artificial intelligence is not intelligent. I mean, it definitely is artificial. It definitely is artificial, but the goal really is to assist human intelligence, right? Which is why I say maybe assistive or something like that. Intelligent is what we're really talking about. Now, there are some things that AI is very good at. I won't go into the different models, the computer bit. When I talk about model, I'm talking about structural models of how the AI software systems have been assembled and what they can do. But essentially, there is one thing that human intelligence has that AI doesn't really have and may never have, is the ability to generate something that is completely unique and never ever been thought of before, because we have something called emotions, which technology yet doesn't really have that, as far as we know. So what you have are the current AI systems essentially rely on massive databases. If the World Wide Web didn't exist, then AI would be what it was when I was first working on it, trying to program things in a language called Lisp on a mini computer. So you have massive databases that you can now interrogate to bring information together and try and summarize and assimilate that information. And that essentially is what a lot of AI is doing, right? When you ask a query. But there are all kinds of issues with that. It's fine if you're dealing with like a chat box type application. In other words, you're a company and people keep calling you and saying, how do I adjust this? How do I do that? Once you can say, okay, these are the main issues, then you can program in responses to those issues, and you can take the human out of the system, at least for a little while, to try and sift through, the most important things. Or where you are relying on technology capabilities that are greater than human capabilities. For example, with radiologists, right? Digital radiology has grown enormously in the past 2 decades, but the resolution of an electronic X-ray is much greater than the resolution of foveal vision for the average person. So if you look at, we did a lot of work with radiologists, you would find that in reality, if you were looking for, say, cancerous nodules in scans of lungs, the average radiologist would find things about 55% of the time.
That's significant. Okay.
Well, and I used to say, wow, how can... And they say, oh, don't worry, because lots of people look at it. So eventually somebody's going to say, what's that? Right. That's what they hope for. We know that with AI systems now, that number goes up to about 90%. Not that's perfect, but a significant improvement. And now it can sort of guide the radiologist to look at maybe the bigger picture of what might be going on. It can also be used, one of the early problems in digital radiology was, how do you calibrate the screens? Right, you're essentially looking at an electronic screen, and you have to get the grayscale right. Otherwise, you might get something that looks like it's a nodule of a tumor. It might be too bright, or you might miss it because it's too dim. And you were supposed to calibrate screens, and that calibration process, we measured it, took about 30 minutes per screen. So if you're a radiologist with 4 screens and you're supposed to calibrate them every day, how often do you think you actually it was done, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of, and again, this notion was, well, lots of people will look at this and eventually somebody will see it. It reminds me of the case of Ötzi the Iceman. I don't know if you recall this. So when the glaciers began to retreat in the Alps, a body was uncovered of somebody from, hundreds, maybe 1,000 years ago. And he was called Ötzi the Iceman. And for 2 years, people tried to figure out, what did this person die of, right? Did they die of disease? Did they die of hypothermia? I mean, what was it? And eventually, there's a big conference on this, and they were showing images. There were lots of MRI images. And a grad student in the back of the hall said, "Excuse me, what's that up on the top left of the image?" And there's an arrowhead in his shoulder, right? And that probably is what killed Ötzi the Iceman. Nothing to do with all the disease. So just because you look at something doesn't mean you see it, right?
Right.
The perception of what you're seeing is much more critical.
Yeah.
And so AI can help with things like that. Now, it's not going to do the diagnosis necessarily itself, but it's going to guide you and focus you in on that. So in those kinds of areas, I think it's going to be very, very helpful. In areas where you have something that's fairly prescriptive. I mean, if there's a formula, then it can do math a lot faster than I would do it or anybody else. Right? So anything things like that can be very helpful. So it can replace, if you like, the trivial work that you have to do, answering a phone and saying, yes, your account number is X, or you need to do Y. It can do that. So that's why I say it's assistive. It's not really being intelligent there.
How do you utilize AI and ergonomics, though?
Well, there are 2 ways. 2 main ways. One is, and it's not very good at the moment, let me say that, right? One is, think about everything that you have been doing over the years, teaching people how you should be sitting, how you should be working, right? You can take all of that and you can put all of that into an AI system that can deliver and remind people this is what you should do. Maybe every morning you get up and we used to have software system like this that the alerts would come up on the screen. Yeah, okay. So there's that side. There's the education and reinforcement side of encouraging good postures, and then there's the analytical side. That is technologies that look at saying, whoa, you realize that you've just gone into a posture that could cause injury, or you realize that over this period of time, X number of times you were working in a posture that could cause problems, blah, blah. So I think at the moment, maybe those 2 ways. But the problem with the latter approach, the alerting approach, is that our ergonomic tools are ultra crude. We like to think, yes, we like to think, oh yes, there's the NIOSH lifting equation. Really, do we have any evidence that really, yeah,
And the technology, it's also that I would think they either have to be cameras or wearables or exoskeletons, and that is an issue also, right? Am I wearing it properly? Am I wearing it consistently? So there's a lot of variables I think there that are not quite there,
No,
right?
absolutely. I remember this is going back a few years now. There's a company in the Bay Area that's called Lumo. I don't know if they're still, and they had a little back sensor and like a belt that you put on, and we did some work on that and testing that and things. And, I mean, it's cool to start with, but it's the kind of thing that pretty quickly ends up being in the corner of your bedroom or whatever. You can't be bothered with it, because and it's not clear just because something is alerting you that you're in a bad posture that you automatically know how to get into a good posture or that you'll stay in that good posture. And then sometimes there are real surprises. So at one time this was a European company that had a chair that had 7 sensors built into the chair that would measure how you were sitting, and one area would vibrate if you weren't sitting appropriately in that area of the chair. And they actually provided us at Cornell with one of those chairs. I mean, I think it was the only one in the US, right? And we did some studies on this, and then we thought, well, this could be great. And then we talked to facility managers who said, you mean every chair's going to have a battery in it and I'm going to have to look after that? No way, no.
Not to mention, I imagine the cost on that chair was
I was going to
exorbitant.
say it would be
It
prohibitive.
wasn't.
There was a company, I think a couple of companies,
Yeah.
and I don't know if they've continued with it, but the idea was, let's say you have adjustable sit-stand desk and a height adjustable chair. I think it was
Yeah.
mostly the desk. And
Yeah.
you would take your badge, you would set it, you would tell it what settings you wanted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the badge, like when you swiped it, it would adjust to you. But my
Sure.
fantasy is the chair would adjust, the lighting would adjust, if it knows who you are. But somebody has to tell it, right? The desk would adjust, but it would have to know
Well,
your metrics.
yeah, I
Right.
mean, somebody has to, but the other thing that is that it's not constant over time. Right? I mean, you can't you don't want to stay in one posture for a long period of time, right? But ultimately, I mean, I remember, so back this is changing tack just a little bit, but it illustrates the point I want to make. Back in the early 90s, a major problem in workplaces was passive cigarette smoke exposure.
Oh, wow.
So we actually worked with a company and developed a furniture product that had a very high efficiency filter built into the workstation. And it worked beautifully for getting rid of any cigarette smoke. I mean, we did a number of studies on it. In Canada, in Statistics Canada, we fitted out a whole floor of the building with this. Harvard and Cornell did this huge joint project, and we thought, great, this is great. Everybody will want this, right? How many people wanted it? 0.
Oh
Why?
my goodness. Wow. Wow. Wow.
Well, the facility manager said, so let me get this right. Every desk is going to have an air filter in it. Yeah? And that air filter needs power, right? Yeah. And that air filter needs replacing, right? Yeah.
Alan, you're making all of us facilities managers sound like terrible people.
No, not terrible.
It's okay. It's okay.
But,
I'm just
but,
joking.
but no, but it's a serious issue. I mean, if you think
No,
about
it's
it,
just
if you have 1,000 people, right, that's a lot of work that now you've got to plan for. It's a lot of cost. And they would say things, it's like your air conditioning system. How often should you change the filters in that? Well, who knows? Because it depends how dirty the air is. So do you remember there's a company called Johnson Controls developed something called the Personal Environments Module. A wonderful piece of technology, worked really well, but who the heck is ever going to maintain it? And if you can't maintain something over time, it doesn't work. So a lot of times it's not how good the design is. I mean, one of the big issues with sit-stand workstations was you've got an electric one, now we have to power that, and where do the cables go? And now it's a trip hazard. And what happens if there's an electrical problem? And who's going to maintain it? And blah, blah, blah. So practicality.
It become the standard. So that's nice to see. Right.
Well, I don't know where it's standard.
We deal largely with tech companies,
Yeah.
that has become popular. Let's just put that, to have
Oh,
that
no, yeah.
in
Well,
the
no,
office.
but tech companies popularized the Aeron chair, right? I mean, Enron was the, oh, we all have Aeron chairs. And then, Yahoo said, oh, we all need the look popularized. Was it a great ergonomic chair? Or is it? Not really. It has all kinds of limitations to it, but it's better than what you had before.
Yeah.
So you have to look at the practicalities of saying you may have a great solution to something, but can you really implement it in an economic, manageable manner? And if you can't, it's not going to happen.
And
So,
will it be used?
and will it be used?
Because
Exactly.
And will it
there's
be
also the
used?
human element of getting them to actually adopt the thing. To the point I think you were going to make, Vivian. We all
Yeah.
have a height adjustable chair, or sorry, height adjustable desk.
Do you
How
use it?
many of us are standing? I mean,
Right.
I have one. I'm not standing at the moment, but I do. But I can
Yeah.
look around the building at any given time and say maybe 5% of the employees are using it. And
Yeah.
so,
Sure.
that constant conversation about you just need to be moving, we just have to keep reminding people of that
So
because they
let me
forget.
ask you this. Just, Amy, from what you do, office design, office, real estate manager, Alan, so where does AI fit into planning an office? Because there's been so much
Mm,
reshuffle as
yeah.
people are now landing in this hybrid model and people are back to the office. I had one woman describe it to me like the game of Tetris. I have to
Hmm.
try to fit in, I now overhired. I have more people on the payroll than I have desks for them, but they're going to be rotating in and out. So I feel like things have gotten a little bit more complicated. Where do you see AI fitting in just the helping, the planning, or does that even not, does that exist? And Amy,
Well,
maybe.
sure. I mean, it's space optimization, right? And that's what I say. It's not being intelligent, it's being assistive. In
Right.
other words, it's saying if you have this kind of layout, then you can optimize the number of people who are going to be in this floor plate. Right? But then I can tell you what happens, okay?
Okay.
And that is, different groups say, oh, wait a minute, but my group is the most important group, and we actually need that extra, 5 square feet per work, and then say, no, I mean, you'll get all kinds of bad. So yes, you can optimize things.
Right.
Even if you optimize them, I guarantee that what is built a year later will not be what is there.
Well, that's very true.
Right?
Mike is in the midst of a office. You're opening a whole new office. You've been really like in the thick of it. Has AI assisted you in this
No.
process at all? No,
You
that's interesting.
still need the human component for a lot of this. So I think AI is really great in kind of helping with the inspirations of design
Yeah.
of the office and kind of that look and feel maybe that you're looking to obtain. And maybe you can try to do some max occupancy thoughts, but it still doesn't take into consideration where's the power out? Where are they accessing power? Are there columns in this space that, or like what's the egress in between? So you still need that human component to fall in, right? But I think
Sure.
it's definitely a good conversation starter and maybe has taken that part of design away that historically takes a lot of time for designers to do. So it's
That's
saved
very
time on
true.
that.
It's sort of an outline that helps you begin
Hmm.
the
Yes.
discussion,
Yeah.
I think. And that's really valuable. But to add to what you were saying, Amy, I think in the final design, and I literally had this experience yesterday walking through the construction site with our leaders, the human component is what ultimately drives it. And they are often very emotional decisions. Well, I want to be able to do that, and I want to be
Sure.
able to do this. And so that's the world
Right.
that I live in, is this interesting balance between budgets and time and
And
need and
people's needs
Well,
and
think of
preferences.
lighting.
practicality and
Think
oh
of the lighting you mentioned, right, Vivian? Like that's so personal. And having where the windows are located and how am I going to sit and where's the glare and all of that. I don't
and we
think
even
AI
change.
figure that out.
We change. The three of us on our all four of us on our glasses.
Right.
What our requirements are.
Right. Right.
What shoes are you wearing, Vivian, today versus what you're going to wear tomorrow when you're standing at that desk? There's so
That's
many
true.
variables
Yeah.
that I think are kind of a struggle. I love what AI can do, but I think we have to recognize its limitations.
Right.
Which begs the question that I wanted to ask you, Alan, which is, and maybe I don't mean to oversimplify this, but I certainly know people who are terrified of AI, and I wonder what we can say to them to help them embrace it a bit more or try to understand it better.
Well, the first thing I would say is you need to know who those people are. Because if they are people who are, say, space planners, or if they're legal assistants writing briefs, then yeah, AI is going to maybe impact their work. But for most
Mm,
people, it's not going to do that. The one thing that you're not going to do, and you know this from planning buildings, you do a layout, the churn factor changes that really quickly. You're not
yes.
designing for a constant, right? And so, will AI help speed up that process of a redesign? Possibly it will, but then other factors can change that. For example, you may have one group there that is, developing some new technology that really suddenly booms, and that becomes the dominant thing that you're now looking at. Everybody's using this smart X rather than the Y that we used to sell, right? Or it may be that you get acquired by another company that has a different standard for, their space. I mean, all kinds of things go on. So as I say, people shouldn't be scared of AI replacing their brains or anything. It's not intelligent in that sense. What is AI good at the moment? Well, if you're in a world where you predominantly are dealing with text and it's predictable, in other words, you're writing
Right.
something that's pretty well the same thing, a newsletter every month, then AI can help because it can scour the globe, and pull together what's the information. But you have to be cautious there.
Yeah.
AI always says, no, well, we quality check the information. No, you don't. I can't tell you how often when you really drill down, they've just pulled some website from some obscure company or something that has no backing. I mean, no. So it is assistive. It can help shape your thoughts in some sense, but it's not going to replace you.
I think
Even
what
with, sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you. I was going to
No,
say
no.
it also makes us, it's kind of your radiation story. It also might bring up things that we didn't think of. So it's
Yes.
always a good way
Absolutely.
to kind of like elaborate on what you might be doing or thinking or exploring.
Well, it's very interesting because there's a lot of buzz, and I think it's misplaced. We're not going to need video editors anymore. We're not going to need writers anymore, and AI is going to take everybody's jobs, and we're just going to be sitting around. And I don't, I use it as a, like you said, an assistant. Sometimes I'll ask it
Yes.
to do an outline of something, and 9 times out of 10, maybe out of 10 points, it says I like three, but it did stimulate more ideas from me, going, "Oh, I didn't think of that angle." Right?
Right.
And
That's right.
maybe we're wrong. I don't know. But I think you said something in Vegas that caught my ear. It doesn't necessarily, it won't take your job. It'll make you more efficient at your job. So you can then focus on other things, right? So maybe it's like putting things in a budget and let it calculate whatever it's going to do. And now I can focus on making content and I can, whatever it's going to be. So I happen to be in that camp. I have a girlfriend who says, nope, it's going to take over everything. Use it,
Yeah.
blah, 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 write novels, and I don't know. I mean, maybe
Oh,
in 10
sure.
years.
It can write stuff. It's not right. It's pulling together pieces from
Already.
that are already there, and it's like
Yeah.
having a bowl of M&Ms. You're grabbing different groups when you go in there. Some will be good, some won't be. Whatever. It doesn't have emotion. So you
Yeah.
can't, maybe you can do yes, I can get a really efficient space layout, but it might look horrible. When you're designing, so as a designer, you said this very early on, the appearance of things is really important. That wow factor. The wow factor is not based on space efficiency. If it was, we'd all have offices like they were at the turn of the last century with Sears Roebuck, just rows of people behind little calculators or whatever. No, it's
Well,
not doing
to
that.
the point you made
Yeah.
earlier, Alan, it's that emotion that you're trying to draw on. So you're designing a space that draws people in, that gives them comfort, that makes them feel comfortable in the space. I was going to mention something, an exercise that I did some time ago, maybe 6 months ago, where this was part of an offsite that we were doing on the people team. And the question that we asked was of a chat tool or an AI tool was, give me the top three things that I ought to implement in my job or on my team to be more efficient. And so I went through it three different ways. I did it, and the language is already written for us, but I did it as a facilities manager. I did it
Mm-hmm.
as a corporate real estate executive, and I did it as a workplace coordinator. And I
Mm-hmm.
used the exact same language. And what I got were nine really cool ideas of things that my
Sure.
team ought to work on in the next year. And I thought that was just
That's
great, and
very.
we started
Yeah.
working on it. Like, it was great.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I rely a lot on whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or a few of the others. Where it's helpful is phenomenal. Like, and it's also gives it to you in 5 seconds. That's the mind
Right.
blowing bit, you know.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, yeah,
Interesting.
that's just that's the speed. I mean, you're looking at massive computing power behind that that's giving it.
Yeah, of
But
course.
we want everything instantly now. But I think that's great. You see, that's the
true.
assistive thing. It's assisting you by giving you suggestions on here are things to think about. You know, they may be relevant. Now, if you had gone in there and said, okay, I'm going to build a facility, but this facility is going to be in India or in the Himalayas or a different in Saudi Arabia, it probably would generate quite different
Yeah,
suggestions for you. So it's
yeah,
useful there to remind you of some things, but you
yeah.
are still in charge. It's not taken over your job. It's maybe made you more efficient at your job. And the more that your job is kind of boring, prescriptive, repetitive, then yeah, potentially the more that can be taken over, not just by AI, but by even robotic things. I mean, here in where we are in
Mm.
Southwest Florida, Amazon are building a 750,000 square foot warehouse
Wow,
that will be their first robotic warehouse. 93% of the work will be done by robots, right?
wow,
Now
wow.
you go, oh
Amazing.
boy, but they're not going to have a lot of back injuries. They're not going to have a lot. It's 24/7 operation until something goes wrong. A hurricane will take it out or something, and then there'll be chaos.
Right,
But
right.
but that's
Control that.
where the technology can help with something that is ultra boring and potentially injurious. I mean, if baggage handlers could get rid of that, their lives, I'm sure, would be much better used in other ways than just toting things around. So I think that's what we're going to see in the future. The technology is hopefully going to take away some of the less interesting work, some of the more physically challenging work maybe, and in
Right,
that way
right,
maybe reduce injuries. But will it make work more enjoyable? Probably not. You found 9 things that your team could be doing by
Yep.
querying it 3 different ways, right? And I bet people in your team are going, oh my gosh, he's just got 9 different things we have to think about. Why couldn't we just have one? I mean, will you make your mind up?
Well, I love it, and I know we're coming on time here. So if we had to just maybe each one of us contribute something where we either what's on our wish list or where we see it's going or where we hope it doesn't go. So I think that could be a nice thing if everybody just kind of contributes one. So Mike, let's start with you.
Gosh, you caught me off guard here. I have no
Quickly, chat GPT, type in, what should I, what should,
Exactly. What did I ask?
what did
Okay.
I ask? What can I tell
I've
this
got
person?
one. I've got
Good, Amy.
one.
I'll defer to you, Amy.
As the furniture dealer and working with designers, I would like to, as you said, still focus on sustainability, but also bring
Sure.
back the ergonomics and the human centric work environments.
I like that.
And so trying to educate more people and more companies back to that.
I would add, I would love to see more wellness tools developed. And if there's a way to integrate AI in
Hmm.
that, which I think already exists, to help with stress management. There already are some pretty great AI tools for just how do I make my day more efficient and productive. And there's even some that will do your scheduling to free up time to actually do the heads down meaningful work. So more of that, right? Hey, maybe it's something that's going to pipe in music at certain intervals that help me, focus better or relax more. So anyway, kind of exploring that world. That's me. So, Mike, have you thought of one yet?
Yes, actually, building efficiency. I think tools that, tell you that the air conditioning system is on the fritz before it actually does that. Anything that makes everything in the building a little bit more efficient. They're not as
Wonderful.
efficient as we think they are.
Right. And Alan, we'll end with you and then we'll wrap it up.
Good. Well, I think everything that you just described is really based on what we academics spend our lives doing, and that is research to figure out what really is important, what tools can work, what is the most accurate way of measuring something or implementing something. Can we evaluate how well something is working? And at the moment, from everything I've read about AI and different AI systems, with few exceptions, that kind of evaluation is absent. Everybody's sort of excited about it and they're making all kinds of, claims of what the future will be. But in reality, who's really studying what the human impact has been so far? How well is it working? You can use it, for example, in ergonomics. Yes, you can now automate finding people in poor postures, and you can put a number on that. But your eyes can do that without any need for AI. And if you actually teach people how to do things in an appropriate way, you don't need the AI to be able to do that, right? So I
would
like,
agree with that. Yeah. But
yeah,
AI can help you with the data collection.
it can help you.
Yeah.
Well, yes, it can help with data collection. But again, with data collection, unless you really know what you're doing with the data, you can kind of misunderstand and misinterpret things, And so, there's no doubt that it's going to play an increasing role in replacing boring, repetitive, predictive types of tasks that rely primarily on text or language. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robotics might do things like, assembling things on a production line, but that's not necessarily the AI part unless you're trying to teach the machine something. So I think that there is a role there. And I mean, our role is to put AI in its context and say, look, this can be helpful to you. But you have to know how to query it. You have to know how to it goes back to one of the first projects I ever worked on, way back in the 70s, was titled Ask a Silly Question, right? And because we were looking at why are so many surveys done that produce useless results, right? You ask a dumb question, you get dumb answers. So there's all this, a lot of publicity about AI, but who is actually really helping to teach people how you can effectively use it to improve some component of your own work or your own health or whatever it is, and I think that's going to be an area for future development, but it's not here yet.
Okay. Well, I guess what I'm hearing is we have great tools that are here, greater tools that will emerge, but us humans are still very important. And that's good to know. Anyway, we
Right.
thank you so much for joining us,
Well,
really.
Alan, thank
Thank
My
you.
you
It's
so
pleasure.
been
much.
Thank you.
fantastic to talk to
Great
you.
And
Yeah.
insight.
thank you, everybody who's tuning in and listening. And please subscribe, follow, and we'll see you the next time.